in here have seen the documentary, or at least part of it? The family? Okay. I'll give a little bit more background on it then as we go along. The reason I wanted to come and give the presentation tonight was I knew you would be a friendly audience, and I've had a very complex relationship with my own story, trying to figure out where I came from, how to explain it to people, and that started for me when I was really young, and people would say, what does your dad do? They didn't ask, what does your mom do? Because we were back in the days where my mom was a homemaker. But can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So trying to figure out an answer to that simple question was something that I still kind of struggle with, and so it was actually kind of helpful for me when the family came out, because this person had done a five-part documentary about what we didn't call the family, we called it the fellowship, and it gave me a sense of, okay, somebody else has done my story for me, at least part of it. I didn't really recognize myself in it, in all of it, but I certainly recognized a good part of it. So when I talk to you tonight, I would say that the theme that I hope you connect with is this idea that we all have choices of what communities we choose as adults. But as children, we don't so much, right? This is, as I said, on my first post about this on my Facebook page, this was the water I was swimming in. And so often, you know, when we are in that place, especially as children, it's very hard to describe it to anyone else. So I hope that you'll see your story maybe in a different way, and also understand a bit about my story and how I got here. So I have a few pictures that I'll show you as we go along. And the first one is, wait a second. Okay. So, August, my family is on Netflix. This is a 5-part documentary called The Family. It's by Jeff Charlotte. And I had known about his writing. He had written for Harper's. He had written, I think he was in the New Yorker. And I read some things that had to do with things that I recognized from my past. The main one is, if you've seen the documentary, one of the main people who is associated with the family is a man named Doug Coe. And it's a low resolution picture, sorry about that. But he is here in the center talking to the Reagans. But I knew him differently. I knew him as my Uncle Doug. And this is my dad to Doug's left and my brother Pete to his right. My dad is 10 years younger than Doug. Well, Doug has passed away now, but they were almost like brothers. And you will see other things as we go along. I'll show you that it wasn't a passing thing for me to be in, quote, the family or the fellowship. This is a screen grab from the family documentary, and I was looking and pausing every time I could to see if there was any picture of my dad or mom or anyway, and then when I saw this as kind of a background thing on one of the chapters, I recognized even the typewriter font. We had a typewriter that was one of those IBM Selectrics, and it had cursive, and this was it. It might not have been ours, but we had one. And in this you can see that this is a, well, you obviously you can't see all of it, but it's kind of an org chart. And trying to think of how much background to give you. The family, as described in the documentary, and I guess is true, you know, it's a very secretive kind of being under the radar kind of group in Washington, D.C. mostly, but they have a lot of different ministries under this umbrella that we now is known as International Foundation. But my dad was very involved with a couple of things. You can see right here where it says golf pros. That's my dad. And then he's over here with Cornerstone right here. And that's an intentional community where I lived, and I will tell you a little bit more about that coming up. He was also involved with student leadership. And so to understand where how I came to be in the family, you have to understand really how my dad's story. My dad is here on the right with his two brothers. His brother Babe is on the left, and the oldest brother Sonny is in the middle. So, skipping to 1961, this is a tract that you might remember. Well, sometimes people still have kind of tracts, little pamphlets that tell a story that are supposed to help you understand life a little bit better or a certain religious belief. This is my dad's tract, and in it he writes about how he was incomplete without Jesus, and the reason that he had that void in his life is because his brother Sonny, the one in the middle, the hero of the family, had passed away suddenly in an Air Force training accident in 1956. So my dad and his brothers were all championship golfers, and so my dad the tract is about how he tried to fill his life by playing golf and winning tournaments, and he did. It was on a national championship golf team at University of Houston. But this did not fill his soul. He still felt like he was needing something in his life, and it was very significant. So in this, he says that in the fall of 1957, this is this part, he's at the University of Houston, and he's invited because he is a sports leader. He's the captain of his golf team, and his golf team has won these national championships, so he's a big deal. And he's supposed to go to this meeting that's basically not a revival, but like a rally. And he goes and he hears this gospel message. My dad had grown up Mormon, which is a whole other part I'm not going to get into. But anyway, this really spoke to him, and to his younger brother. And so he accepted Jesus as his Savior, and that moment was a turning point that was never turned back on, okay? Like, it was a moment in which everything changed, and the way he is today has to do with that moment in 1957. So, this goes into a little bit about his wife, pretty brunette, Lorraine Langdon, who he knew when he was a child before their marriage. She was brought to a vital relationship with Christ. So there's this understanding that you are complete once you have received Jesus in your heart. And that from that point on, he decided, some people could go through that, but they wouldn't feel compelled to tell that story. Not my dad. My dad wanted to tell that story, and so other people could know that joy, right? Know that peace and completion of life. So he was a championship golfer, but all of a sudden he didn't really, and my grandfather said he was crazy. But he said, I want to devote my life to telling other people about Jesus. So he did play golf. He taught his kids to play golf, but golf was never the number one thing. I love this picture of him and my mom because he has a Bible in his hand, and that's pretty much the way he is now, only he looks older. So, okay. So then the other part here is that they're very influenced. This is in the 1950s, they're very influenced by the Red Scare. I talked with my mom and dad, and if you've seen the family, the roots of it have to do partially with the Red Scare and this idea, in the 1950s especially, that's when I believe our Pledge of Allegiance, the words under God were put into that, like we are under attack, our way of life is under attack. My parents said, oh yeah, we almost didn't have kids because, we could get blown to smithereens any minute. So there was a lot of fear, and the antidote to that fear for my parents was trusting in God to take care of them, and also going out and, in a sense, like there's a battlefield, and you want to have as many soldiers for Jesus. And so it's up to you to go and do this every day of your life. So that's where they were coming from, and that's how they ended up in the family. This is Abram Verady, yeah. He has a whole story that I don't know all that well. It is covered somewhat in the family, but he was very much about his, I guess, twist on this, and that really appealed to my parents, and especially my dad, which was, okay, it's good that you want to tell people about Jesus, but it's even better if you tell the people in power about Jesus, because then you're really influencing all the people that they could influence. And my dad was he's still really on fire about that. So that's a different view that a lot of people have about Jesus, but that's the view that I always understood as to, like, that was really compelling my dad to make decisions with my mom about our family. This is my dad with Billy Graham at the National Prayer Breakfast. And I put that it's in early February every year, because so is my birthday. And so I had to share my birthday with the National Prayer Breakfast many, many years. And my mom would call me, or she'd leave me a note and say, your birthday's more important, but we'll be gone all day. And I knew that this was a culmination of many, many things from my parents. This one day a year that is talked about a lot in the documentary. I don't think that many people paid that much attention to it, really, but they will, going forward, because of the different tie-ins that the family, or what we call the fellowship, have with political figures. For my dad, what that meant was, like, he had the golf ministry, as you saw on the org chart, and he was also, tell you more about Cornerstone in a minute, but he was very, very much into using his platform in golf to not only reach golfers, pro golfers, but also there's so many people in Washington, on Capitol Hill, in the executive branch, legislative, probably not judicial, but who love to play golf. And so one of the places he would go bring people to play is Burning Tree. And Burning Tree is a golf club in Washington that is only for men. And it's very exclusive, so a lot of people want to go there. Or Congressional, another place where it's hard to get to play there, but because he's a PGA pro, he could bring people in and they could play there. And so I know he played golf with a lot of people, like Senator Nunn, well, when Sam Nunn was a senator, and there's other people that I could remember there, but just you can get the idea that it was a way to spend like 4 or 5 hours with somebody, and you might be able to talk to them about other things that, than golf. And my dad would, and he would talk to them straight up about, have you given your life to Jesus on some level, because that's what he does every day. So anyway, moving forward, and if you've got questions, save them till the end, because I'm trying to get through a whole bunch of things before that. This is my dad. So my dad would say he's not political, but all of this is about politics. So this is him in the middle right here, and this is LBJ. And they are, these athletes are watching him putt on the White House green. And it says the president did his practicing as he met with a group of professional athletes and other visitors who have been giving citizenship talks in the schools in the nation's capital. So again, you have that same, like, the One Nation Under God, that movement of we got to make sure everybody is on our side. This is my dad and mom at Nixon's, going to Nixon's inaugural ball in 1969. You know, there's a lot of inaugural balls. There's not just one. It's not like he knew Nixon's, but he went. They went. Okay, here's my spoiler alert. I kind of said this earlier. My dad does not change, okay? He is still doing the same things. This is his a paver that it's one of those pavers you could buy to support scholarships. And so he figured out, we bought it for him, but we really worked on the wording that he would love. And this is what we got, because that's who he is. And I think that is also a really important thing to tell you, that as I think about me as the narrator for this story, it's not a story about my dad, it's a story about me, right? So when I think about my dad and his sort of unchangingness, and my mom too, it's very hard when you grow up in a situation like that to feel like you have a way to have a conversation about anything that is not like in keeping with what you're being taught. It's not an open dialogue. And so even today when I think about some of the things that I talk to people here all the time about, like I don't talk to my parents about political things or liberal ideas, because I know that I know what they believe, and it's really hard to see that conversation becoming something that's, I mean, it's not going to change anyone's mind. So I've had a lot of fear around that. It helps me to say that in front of all of you. Okay, my childhood in the family. Here's me and my older brother. In 1964, so I am like not even 18 months, and I don't know why my parents thought it would be funny to be in the trunk of a car, but we traveled all the time. And so we got used to being in the car, but not in the trunk. We were in the trunk. Here we are as an all-American family. This is my brother Pete. This is my brother Paul, so everyone said, why isn't your name Mary? Okay, now I'm going to get to Cornerstone. Let's see, it's 6:50. Okay. Cornerstone is a really huge house that used to be owned by President Bart from the University of Maryland. It's in College Park, Maryland. I moved there when I was 9. I lived there until I was 18. And my parents and my family were there. We were in an intentional community, intentional Christian community. So that's not that uncommon, I don't think. But if you're in it and you're growing up as a teenager, it feels really weird, because like there's a big, you can't see this, but if you were to look right behind my mom, there's this sign that was about half the size of that. It's marble, and it was etched, given to the glory of God, Cornerstone, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, any of my friends need to just come in the back door. Because it's like, where are we living? It's not a church. Like, who has this on their house? Plus, the house had 7 bathrooms. And I never understood why my mom said 7 bathrooms. But you realize you can kind of extrapolate that there's a whole lot of bedrooms if you've got 7 bathrooms. There are 2 stairways. There was like a butler's stairway. And we lived there, and my parents were basically the house parents, but we also had a lot of structure. You know, like we all had dinner together. I met a lot of people who came through. One of my favorite stories is that there was a couple that came to live there and then moved nearby, and I babysat their oldest son. Okay, so at the time he was just a little baby, and he grew up to be a famous director, and his name is Ryan Johnson, and he did all the new Star Wars and Knives Out, and so it's sort of interesting to see how people pop back up and in what capacity. Although I don't know what Ryan believes or anything, but I know that his dad and my dad are really, really close. The other thing that I wanted to point out about Cornerstone was that the people I met there really complemented my life in a lot of ways, with a lot of things that I would never have learned from my family. A lot of the things that people associate me with here, like with making things, nobody in my family does that, but there were women who lived at Cornerstone, young women, and they would teach me how to knit and crochet and sew and all the things that my family didn't have. So that part was really good. The part that wasn't so good was the fact that for my family to be together, we usually had to leave our house. We would leave on the weekend, and my dad had this seasonal job up in Pennsylvania where he would be a golf pro up there, and so we would go up to, it was like 2-hour drive, and we would go up there and we would hang out in the house there, and then we would come back to our house and be with 4 or 5 other people. So that was different. And what happened a lot for me was that I always felt like our family was very elastic, and I was always sharing my family with a lot of people, especially my parents. I was always sharing them with other people. In fact, my parents were, when my mom went into labor with me, my parents were in at that point, a campus ministry, Campus Crusade for Christ in Lawrence, Kansas. And they had to drive to Kansas City, and I'm not sure how far that is, but they had to drive. My mom's in labor, and one of the students needed a ride to Kansas City, and my dad's like, sure, we'll take you. And so it's like, even when I'm like about to be born, like somebody's going for a ride, and I'm like, really, okay, like, that's totally outside of anything I could control, but that really tells you a lot about the way the Hiskeys roll. Okay, at the same time, my dad is playing golf, and he's putting a lot of time into teaching us to play golf, me and my brothers. This is me caddying for my dad. It's like my favorite picture of me and my dad. And I'm age 14 there, and we had a great time. Because my mom didn't play golf, the 4 of us made a foursome. And I was the worst one by far, because my brothers had started when they were very young. And my dad started to teach me only when I was really bugging him to teach me. It was a very patriarchal world that I grew up in, both in the family and the time and the way my mom was. And so I kind of resented that, because I thought if I had started when I was really young, it would be better. But we did have that closeness when we played golf. So we had a lot of closeness in our beliefs, because nobody really had any different beliefs or would say any different beliefs. We always had the right answer, if my dad was asking us questions about a Bible verse. And we also had a lot of competition. And that is definitely, for you all who have grown up in a competitive family, I think that there's great things about it, that my brothers and I all went to school on golf scholarships. That was really helpful, because my parents had no backup plan for that. But I also think that it's, when you're competitive, I think that's like one of the things I said to you before about being able to tell my parents something that's not what they believe, or have another conversation. It's sort of like somebody has to win the conversation. And so I would like not compete with that. So, okay, so moving on. In 1982, I was 19, and this part of my life I have written about. So skipping forward, in 2007, I went on a road trip with my dad, and I wrote about that. I went into it thinking I was going to write a very different story, and when I came out, I ended up writing a story about this complicated relationship with my dad. I won't get into all that, but part of this piece has to do with my dad, with my history in college, in which I went to Duke University. My freshman year, I played really well, my team did really well, but I didn't make it through my second semester. I had what was then called a nervous breakdown, and I really didn't want to live. So I'm glad that I lived. But the reason that this is an important part of this story is that for me, as a person who has her own beliefs, I kind of didn't realize that. I kind of like took this terrible thing happening from a lot of the pressure that I was putting on myself and pressure from outside of me, being in a really intense academic environment and also a very intense family. It took that for me to say, okay, what do I believe? It took a lot of therapy and a realization that I don't think I can go home and be the person I was, because if I do, I'm gonna die. I'm probably gonna die. I can't do that. So then when I thought about what was God telling me, I was thinking, it doesn't really matter what God's telling me if I'm not alive. So my main thing is I've got to be alive, and I've got to figure it out, you know? So that thought has shaped other decisions in my life that have come when I've had mental health issues. And that's a whole other thread of the story, because my dad's family has, many of the women in his family have had mental health issues. So I'm bipolar generationally in like every generation. So there's a lot of threads. But the main thing here is, I love that headline, "He was God to me," because my dad really did feel like God. The God that I knew was a he, and he was a father. And here's my dad, he's a he, and he's a father. And so I wouldn't say that when I thought about God, I saw my dad. It wasn't like that. I thought of God as somebody in the clouds, but I never thought of God as she. I never thought of God as having any sort of femininity. And I was also, it was very, very much drilled into me that you should honor your father and mother. And that's another reason I don't rock the boat very much, because they're really into that, like, even now, like, honor your father and mother. And I can hear that over and over and over. So when I think about, like, challenging them on something, even though I'm 56, it's like, I feel like I'm 9 again or something. But anyway, so this was a story that really changed me, because I realized, too, that I wasn't alone in my family. I wasn't, in terms of other people had families like this, which for whatever reason could be, it could be religious, it could be other reasons, but parents putting a ton of pressure on their kids. Now for me, I didn't feel like my dad put a lot of pressure on me. I felt like this is again not a great, it's low resolution photograph, but it says, Dad never pushed me to play golf. I just copied the way he pushed himself. And my dad is very much that way. He's just a very driven person. I think that's really attractive to a lot of people, especially men who are like on Capitol Hill and see this guy playing really great golf because they all want to play golf well, but he's also seems really together because of, as he will tell them, his relationship with Jesus. And so that was something I thought, you know, I'm competitive, I want to do that, you know, and trying to keep up with my dad and get attention from my dad. Here's Joey, who's in the room tonight. Thanks for coming, Joey. Here she is. Anyway, if anybody would like to read that story, you can follow up with me. I will send it to you. Okay, so now, 1990, it's probably a little bit earlier than 1990, because I went to the Old English Festival, and I thought, this place is really cool. I had gone to different churches when I got here that were, at the beginning it was like I went to a charismatic church because that was really familiar to me, like people putting their hands up, and people who, another really conservative church I went to. But then I was working at the newspaper because that was my career for a long time, and I was starting to feel a lot of friction between what I believed and what people believed around me, and also my job. One thing that happened was I covered the Operation Rescue protests by Randall Terry that were down on Spring Street. I don't know if anyone was here at that time, but they were awful. It was just awful to be covering that and to watch these protesters or just bully these women trying to get in and have an abortion. I had always thought I was against abortion because the people around me were, but I thought, if I'm Christian, am I like Randall Terry? Am I like Jimmy Swaggart, like he's cheating on his wife and all these headlines? And I started to really think, I don't know if I want to be known as a Christian if Christians include all these people doing these terrible things. So it started to make me think about, well, where do I fit in, and what do I believe? One of the main things that I learned here at St. Bart's, or that, not that I learned necessarily, but I experienced, is I was always told that being gay or lesbian is wrong. Like that's against the will of God. It says so in the Bible. And the Bible is the inspired word of God. So I went with Rex Rector. He was getting people to go to Project Open Hand and deliver meals to people with AIDS. And Mike Slater and I did this every month for a long time. And I thought, oh, this is good, like I'm a do-gooder, that everyone will be happy that I brought them a meal. But that was not the case. A lot of people were really pissed off at us because we weren't there on time, or they were hungry, or they had had a bad day because they were dying of AIDS. And the more I got to know Mike and his partner Mark, and the more we talked about the theology of this, I realized my lived experience was not keeping up with what I had been taught. And I thought, okay, my parents might think this, but how many gay people do they actually know? How many lesbian people do they actually know? Like, I can't really believe this just based on them telling me that I should. Like, I don't believe this anymore, And it's like, whoa, it's kind of freedom, but it's kind of scary too, because I don't want to go to hell. I mean, like I'm thinking, okay, I don't think I'm going to hell on that one, but it's a sense of like, it's chipping away at the things that I always thought that I believed. And it felt good to me because I thought I can't continue to hold something that's not true to me. So that's why I called this part of the story Search for Authenticity. When I came to St. Bart's, one of the things I really appreciated in the Old English Festival, and it's still true today even though we don't have the festival, is that there's a lot of outreach. And I thought, this is what the church needs to be doing. We need to be making a difference in the community. And here's a place that doesn't just talk about it, they do it. So I thought, there's so many ways that I can tell you about my community here. I could spend many hours telling you about that, but I don't have that, and you all know St. Bart's for yourself, most of you. So I thought what would be good is to show you a few pictures of really cool women here. And if I had a picture of you, Angela, I would start with you. Angela is our rector, and she's fabulous. Anyway, here is one. That's Jean Smith. And I think that she is either 101 or 102, and this was taken a few months ago at Joyce Lassiter's service. Anyway, I just really appreciate the strong women here, and also the fact that women are not secondary, we're equal or even more. Because I had not felt that way. I had not felt that way in my home growing up. Or this is Corinne, and I wanted to point out Corinne because seeing women in the clergy has really been important to me. The church that my parents go to in Maryland doesn't allow women to be leaders, and so I think that's ridiculous. And so, I miss Corinne. She's a great person. Okay, here are a bunch of fun women and Eli. We went to a movie. We do a lot of cool social things, and they're just, it's funny. It's funny, the community here. I sometimes feel bad that I don't talk about Jesus more, because I think, if it was a real church, we would talk about Jesus all the time. And like in the beginning, I was like, why doesn't anyone hug me? Everybody was always hugging me at my evangelical churches and other places. And then I realized that's not the way this is. And there are boundaries here that are good. Okay, and I'm so glad Ken and Barry are here tonight, because this was really fun. We went to the colonnade. There's Tiff back here. Virginia, another strong woman. Anyway.
Tiff is his nickname. If you don't know that,
yeah,
call him Tiff. He'll know what that means.
Yeah, you can embarrass him straight up. Oh, and I also want to put in a plug for the artist market. That's on Sunday, but also because the creativity here and the support for art and creativity has meant a lot to me. That's not something that was, everything was very competitive for me growing up and with my family, although I make quilts for my family and they like that, but it's sort of an anomaly within my family. So I started this presentation, and I think we're at 7:09, which is good because I wanted to end by 7:15 and take questions. I started to figure out this presentation with a sketch in my journal, and so I'm ending it with that so I can tell you some of the things that I thought about these two worlds. Okay. The family is here on the left, and the family or the fellowship, my experience of that, I mentioned it's very patriarchal. There's a lot of control. Barbara and I talk about the agenda. Everybody my dad has an agenda when he calls me. He's got something to say. He's not going to call for just any reason. It's more Jesus all the time. There's more black and white thinking. And again, this is my experience of the family or the fellowship. I can't speak for everybody in it. Power, competition. There's a language of inclusion where people say, like my dad will say, he's a believer or he's a brother, meaning that person believes in Jesus the way that he does. So you kind of have to know the language to really understand and be part of that. And the other thing that I think that's really powerful about the family is that it's not in a place. It's a network of relationships. And at the end of the family, I thought nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change about the family because they haven't even scratched the surface in this documentary. And the power is in the one-on-one relationships that people have. Somebody you just know that the person's going to pick up the phone when you call. And that can be true with the congressman, senator, all the people that you're close to, you played golf with, or you're in the Bible study with. And a documentary is not going to change that. It's still a very powerful network of people, and I think it always will be. So over here I have St. Bart's, and I think one of the things I like about being Episcopalian is that there's certain messiness about it, like people not knowing exactly. Well, we know what we believe as a core, and we say that in the service, but the way that people enact that in their lives is sometimes really, I think of it as messy, because I feel that way about my life. But there's also this core of ritual that keeps us all kind of centered in the Eucharist and in the liturgy, and I really like that, because I grew up going to a church or to meetings where a man would stand up for 30 or 35 minutes, and we would all take notes about what he said about something in the Bible. And I like the balance of what we do in our services, in our service, that we have that message, but it's not all about that person giving the message. That's one element of what we have. I like that we have more of a matriarchal society here, that we have a lot of diversity. We could definitely have more diversity, but I feel like it's much more diverse than what I grew up with. We have more of the outreach to the least powerful, not to the most powerful. I think there's a lot of compassion here. Many ideas are tolerated. Although I don't think this is a place where conservative people would feel as welcome as other people. Even though we say we're welcome to all, I'm not so sure about that. This is the first place I heard somebody say that God could be she. And at first I thought, no, we can't. And then I was like, that's really powerful. I'm kind of scared of that idea. Now it just really pisses me off when somebody says he. So I play it that way. A lot of emphasis on creativity. And I think that there's also, our language is around what's not said, a lot of mystery. And that jives with what I think about in life, that there's a lot of things that we don't know. And I was always told that there are things that you can know if you read the Bible. Just read the Bible. If you haven't read the Bible enough, that's why you haven't figured it out. And that we are place-based. We are here in Atlanta. I like that because I only live about 2 miles away, so I like being able to pop over here. And then in the middle are the things that have really shaped me today, that I really felt like I as critical as it might sound from some of the things I said about the family, I do appreciate a lot of the relationships that I made there, because they showed me what friendship and community meant. Like when you live in an intentional community and you have to, when you're 15 or 16, confront somebody and work something out who's in their 20s. That's really powerful. I saw my parents, still to this day, they just show up for people. And I think that's such an important thing that we can do for each other. And then also this idea, I think that the people in the family talk about it more than we do, but we still live it, which is in our relationships to Jesus, God, and each other. That's what my community of choice means to me. And so I'm going to wrap it by saying thank you for helping me, because even talking about this right now helps me process it, and being great listeners, and listening to this story. So thank you very much. Yes.
I have 2 questions. One is there a group in Atlanta?
Yeah.
And the other is, what kind of hierarchy is there above, like your dad? Does he answer to, like a bishop, like we would have a bishop?
Right.
What is it, national, regional? How is it organized?
Yes. I'm not sure I can answer that, but the organization at the top is, I think, a group of people called associates, and my dad's an associate, And people said, well, the leader was Doug Coe, but I don't think Doug Coe would have said he was anything more than an associate. It's pretty flat, and there, but Jeff Charlotte, who did this documentary, talks about, well, who's going to take over for Doug Coe because he's gone? Is it his two sons? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what the leadership. I could call my dad, but could get him on the phone right now. Hey, Dad.
We're talking about you.
Yeah, I'm talking about it. Put you on the spot. Scotia Vision. There are many people from the fellowship, from the family here in Atlanta. In fact, when I moved here, I came for a 10-week internship at the AJC. And I knew, Atlanta, big city, I knew that my parents would know someone here. And it's sort of a funny story because the person I ended up living with, the family I ended up living with was, their names are Tom and Alexander Roddy. And they lived on a street that I just thought of as a street like any other street. So I went down to the AJC and people said, well, you're an intern, where are you living? And I was like, oh, it's off of Paces Ferry Road. And they were like, whoa, you're in a really nice area. And I was like, yeah, right. I mean, that's where my parents would be, But they, Tom passed away, but Alexandra, she continues to be an important person to me. And I've talked with her about a lot of things that I've changed my mind about. And she's changed her mind about a lot of things too. So she's actually easier to talk to than my mom. So, in the documentary where they showed the people in Portland having the men's group, there are groups like that everywhere. I'm sure there are in Atlanta because my brother comes down to meet with a guy who does one. And so I don't know much more than that. But try not to talk shop with my brother too much, but that's what he's here for, so, yeah. Did I answer both of your questions? Okay. Susie.
You talked a little bit about it being secretive. What is the secretive part about it particularly?
Well, like if you go, they do have a website, but you won't find out very much there. There's no National Prayer Breakfast presented by International Foundation. You never see anything like that. You don't see them quoted in the paper. When Mark Sanford and the governor of South Carolina went on the Appalachian Trail and then came back and he's not on the Appalachian Trail. Okay. I remember reading or watching his press conference and he said, well, the guys at C Street wanted me to be accountable or something like that. It's in part of the family documentary. I was like, oh, the shit's gonna hit the fan here because nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about C Street. So nobody talks about the fellowship. They don't talk about this only within themselves. It's not meant for that kind of a platform. Now, if he had said, and he might have said this too, but I'm really trusting in Jesus as my Lord and Savior to help me get through this, that would be like, yeah, that's the message. The message is Jesus. So we're not trying to get in the way of that message. That's why we don't want to have our organization out there.
What if you said to your dad, Jesus said, what is said in secret will be shouted from the rooftops?
Yeah? Well,
how would he, about sharing?
well, I'm pretty sure my dad would have an answer to that, and I don't know what it is, but yeah.
I think for me, thank you for all that. It's so moving to me. And full disclosure, I was 10 years ahead of Michelle in Washington, D.C. So my dad was an associate, but we were really peripherally associated with the fellowship, which I never knew was known as the family.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what I got out of your talk and what I'm thinking about now is this relationship with power, which was really offensive to me as sort of a radical 60s child or teenager. But I think part of the attraction of the fellowship in Washington D.C., and I went to school where a lot of politicians' children went to school too, is you knew you weren't going to be shocked by the fellowship. And that's huge, you know, if in a political world, if somebody's not going to drop your name or, like, of course there was a lot of name.
Right.
And then for me, as a sort of a radical Christian early, like Mark Hatfield, who was a major name in the fellowship, maybe before your time.
Yeah.
I think the
Heard
only
that.
senator who voted against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to launch the
Mhm.
Vietnam War. And then another anecdote that to me is very telling, Dick Halverson, his name was a
Mhm.
chaplain of the Senate. I was at the prayer breakfast when Hillary Clinton was speaking to a group, and Dick Halverson introduced her to all these evangelicals. And by then, there had been this huge, you know, right-wing shift, which I was oblivious to, because I wasn't in that world. But anyway, so Dick Halverson got up, I was like, what is he going to do here? And he looked at everybody and he said, shame on us. I was like, whoa! And he just did this amazing defense of Hillary and expose of the kind of rancid misogyny, anti-Hillary stuff. So anyway, so I had a very different experience of it, but the whole thing that has always been troubling to me is this cozying up to power. And for me, when I think about the shift from that kind of radical private group, because the kingdom can be very private, and most kingdom stuff is private. You know, by the time you start shouting it, you kind of ruin it a lot of times. But this private group cozying up to power, eventually being corrupted by that, because that wasn't really. They were trying to bring the gospel to power, and power brought the gospel to them.
I think the documentary shows that, probably not completely. It's definitely, there are limits to what they can say, or what they chose to say in it, but I think that they showed that. And also I think it has to do with the media is changing too. You know, that not very much is done in secret anymore anyway. But thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, Ken.
You talked at one point about the fellowship not changing. And I'm just wondering if you have any sense on kind of a macro demographic level about any kind of change you might see in terms of attrition, people coming into the fellowship, people like you leaving the fellowship, or your friend Alexander who changed your mind. What kind of macro demographic changes might you see?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because the one thing it reminds me of is sort of the economy of it. And by that I mean, like, how do people make a living being in the fellowship, right? So when I was growing up, I knew that we didn't have very much money, and like I told Virginia this, but like I remember vividly a time when I was in elementary school where my mom said, okay, we gotta sit here and pray because we got like a $15 light bill that we gotta pay. And I was like, things must be terrible, you know, I was like pretty stressed. But we prayed, and then she went to the mailbox the next day, and there was a check for $15 from somebody who said, I thought you just might need this, okay? Like, our lives were filled with stories like that, financially and other ways that our needs were met. It's so much so that I didn't think it was weird. I only thought about it as being weird later, and it also made me think, I want a regular paycheck, because this is too hard, you know? But to your point, the way that this worked, as I understand it, was that, like, my dad never raised support. That's what it's called, raising support, is your income. He did not raise his support. He might raise somebody else's support, but somebody else was going to raise his support. Like, they would write a letter and say, Jim and Lorraine have been doing this, this, and this, and if you feel led to give, they might say, well, they have this or this or this that they need, or they call them, or there was always somebody writing a big check. Now those people who are writing the big check, like my dad's 83, and I know like my brother who does a similar, I'm not exactly sure what he does either, but my dad was saying to him, here are the relationships that I've built, and you're gonna need to take care of them. And my brother was like, I'm not sure I can do that, you know? But the relationships are the key to the financial part of that. And so I think that your question, I can't really answer the part about macro demographics. I'm not really sure. I'm down here in Atlanta living my pretty small life in that sense. But I wonder about that. Like, we're not gonna see a GoFundMe for the fellowship, you know? But who's gonna write these checks? If you see the documentary, you got a pretty good idea of who some of them might be. But I wonder about it. I don't think it's gonna be from younger people. It's more like maybe, I was gonna say Cook Brothers, but I'm not sure that they would. I don't think they'd be in the fellowship. They would want a little bit more from the money, I think, but anyway. So, only a partial answer.
So it grows by one-on-one with like testimonies, a witness about
Yeah.
Jesus. And there apparently is no seminary training or anything. Everybody just reads the Bible for him or herself. And certainly not a tax-deductible organization like given to the church.
It's a 501c3.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some people.
So those checks they write in support of individuals, they can somehow.
Okay, it goes to the International Foundation. Yeah, and supports their ministry. Yes, Susan.
Mine isn't exactly a question, and I know I have to run the choir,
Yeah.
but I was in France this summer, and one of the things our guide brought up in sort of just a one-on-one conversation was, you know, the United States of America says you have the separation of church and state, but we French people look at you and say, no, you don't. Not at all compared to France. There is no national prayer breakfast. There is no mention of God on their money. There is no mention of God in a pledge. There is no mention, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yes, churches are still present and there are church weddings, but they're not the same as civil weddings, okay? Clergy are not licensed by states, as they are here, to perform a legal wedding ceremony. You do that at the civic hall, okay? And if you want a church wedding, that's fine. And I asked him, I said, well, I would find that desirable. Do you think it's possible, you know, how did France get there? And he said, well, it was the revolution.
We might be headed to that.
Right, we're going.
It's going to go the other way.
But exactly, but what I'm looking at here is, and listen to what you're saying, it's almost like this group is trying to move in the opposite direction than what France did, by moving more toward
Theocracy.
exactly a theocracy, where the church is supporting the power of the state.
Well, yeah, the thing that I see is kind of more personal than that. It's like, I think the people that I know who are working in the family and fellowship, it would be one nation under Jesus. Not a church, Jesus, okay? And the thing that I think is dangerous about that, the most to me, is there's a naivety that their Jesus is going to be everybody else's Jesus.
Right.
Because Jesus is like,
Trying to talk to people.
I feel like I know Jesus.
Right.
I've, asked Jesus in my heart when I was little, and but everybody who pays attention to history knows that terrible things have happened in Jesus' name, continue to be today. So I'm like, be careful what you wish for. I think it's better to have a separation because for that reason, like
who gets to decide besides which we
Right.
have to choose that?
Right,
Yeah, so,
right.
you know, yeah, but thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Yes, so if, are most of these family people charismatic or fundamentalists?
Claire, did you finish your
Either,
question?
what are the charismatic fundamentalists or evangelical? Are most of them going to, would they consider that, like if you went into one of the big churches that, evangelical or whatever, would you meet a lot of family?
Ah.
Did they go to
Right.
other churches?
Well, that's the kind of church I would grow up. I mostly grew up attending, where churches like that. But I don't, and I would definitely say that people in the family are evangelical because their faith, the idea of telling the story of Jesus is the thing that brings everyone together. But I don't know about labels. I'm going to answer that this way. I had a really hard time explaining what the family or the fellowship was because people have labels for Christians and none of them fit. Evangelical, I would say, oh, conservative evangelical. But like, you know, the reality is we're praying for a gas bill or water bill for $15, whatever that's called, you know? I mean,
That's called faith.
That's called faith. Right, so, right. But the whole thing together, like, we want to know, oh, that label means they believe this, and that label means they believe this, and this is more of a culture, a certain cultural community that's bound by, in the documentary they say Jesus plus nothing. So I never heard that until the documentary, but it kind of rings true. Family.
Would you say from what, some of the things that you're trying to pull this out and what you really are believing between all these worlds? Is this almost like how we as Christians, when we go overseas, that was a great example, where the cultural difference, and then you're going, what does it mean to be a human once I now am out of my group of people, and then you go somewhere else? Are you finding that you're having to do the same thing where you're going, I'm not tossing out all my faith system, but it's evolving, but it's no longer fried chicken and stuff right after church or whatever the culture is, or, you know, it seems like that seems to be the struggle everybody's trying to get around within everybody's personal faith walk.
Right.
That we all do, is what does it mean to be in relationship to God within my culture, but also within my community of faith? Is my community of my faith more about culture, or is it really about God?
Right. And I think that I think that's a really good observation. Like, to me, the things that I was trying to do all the time to be a Christian or a believer in my family would be like, have a quiet time every day, pray, have a prayer list, be in a small group, go to church on Sunday, do these things with my family. And there was a lot of doing. And I think whatever the doing is that you grew up with, like, you have to re-examine that when you're an adult or along the way or something, you know? And for me, I go, well, is this what Jesus, like, could I still believe in Jesus and walk in that way of Jesus and not do all these things? Like, it's okay for them to do that, but maybe I'm not going to do that. And coming to this understanding of, like, okay, I can make my own decisions and walk my own walk. I know that probably sounds really simplistic to a lot of people in here, but for me, not so much. You know, I'm feeling like guilt and shame for not doing what I was taught. I would agree with you on the part of, like, that we're all trying to make sense of that, and we pick places where we think we're comfortable enough to do that, but I think what we're called to do is be uncomfortable as well in our faith. And what does that look like? For me, it's like doing this tonight because I want to be able to talk about it, but it's also really scary for me to be like vulnerable and tell my story in front of people because it's not the story that I was trained to tell, you know? And it's like I'm still trying to make sense of it. But I think that one of the things that we can do as humans and as the subset of humans who are Christians is tell our stories. I think that's such an important thing that we need to do because somebody else in life may need to know what you know. So, yes, Courtney.
So I'm looking over this chart, and you're talking about the patriarchal view in the family,
Yeah.
and that kind of struck me really odd because I'm not used to that. I'm like you, like I grew up in a very female-centered atmosphere, family lifestyle. How was it in a racial component? Were there a lot of African Americans that you saw within the family when you were living in that home? And if not, how were you able to view the world outside of the family when it came to race and meeting other people outside of your?
Well, so my view of the world, first part of the question, there weren't any people of color in Cornerstone where I lived. There were a few people of color in the leadership, the associate level, not very many at all. And it was not a diverse place, you know, it was basically white men. Would you say that's true, Barbara?
Yes, there were a few token, or, you know, lack of a better word, like Tom Skinner,
Right.
Kay James, but there were people whose names you could call. But people were very proud of them, too,
Yes.
to say. But there was no understanding of patriarchy or white privilege.
The way I understood the world was there were people who were Christians who were going to go to heaven, and there were people who were not who were going to go to hell. And it was up to us to try to live in a way that would attract people to believe, or just straight up tell them, you know, that we carry that burden. I think that my parents grew up in a very, this is less the family as it is just, it's less the fellowship than it is my own family. My parents grew up in a very, they met when they were like in first grade, and they lived in a very white place, Southern Idaho. They never, like my dad never saw a black person until he was in high school. And so I think it was pretty scary for them to move to DC at a time of a lot of civil rights unrest. And I remember the fires, the riots that were happening after MLK was shot. I would have been 5, and that freaked them out. I think that they hold really typical views for people of their age, and that's something that's kind of hard to, it's hard to be around.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Marianne?
When you were asked about the hierarchy and who was above the associates and all, you said, well, it's just a group of people. And I thought at that point, no, it's a group of men.
That's right.
And maybe you don't have a real grasp of the power flow and the money and the future because you're a woman and you are not
But they
living
don't
on
tell you.
secrets.
Correct. Yeah, it's interesting because I felt closer to that because I played golf, and I was closer to that activity that involved mostly men. But even then, there's places that, like, if you finish playing golf, you can't go. I can't go in the country club because that's on men only. I mean, there's a certain places I can go for women, but those are like add-on places. So that's another symbol or way that of exclusion and of separation. And you know, I think when people, this is going to sound obvious, but when people have that, they're not going to give it up. They're not going to say, oh, now I have awareness that I have this privilege and maybe I'm going to share it. No, they're not. It's not, it's just going to be this way. So I think to Ken's point about demographics, you know, that's not the way the world is becoming. So I wonder if that would erode some of the power, because we're, as a society, becoming more diverse. But I don't want to hold my breath.
We also don't join it, you are invited.
Right. That's right.
That's one thing people don't understand. You can't just go to the college as part of the fellowship.
Right.
It's like the Masons.
Yes. Very risky.
Very.
So, you shared a lot with us one night
Yeah.
at dinner. And
I
so,
don't remember because we were drinking.
I guess, it was a great night at the holiday.
Let's go back to that picture.
But, and help me if I'm wrong, because I'm gonna restate some of what you said, but correct me. You talked about, and that was what I was hoping you were getting to, because the part I got was, you talked a lot about your relationship with your dad in particular, and the not relationship when you were a kid, that you had to share him with all those people, and that if the fellowship needed something, it didn't matter what birthday, whatever it was, he left and went.
Right.
And so my question is, I mean, I heard that, and I also heard the pain when you were talking about it. But is that true of the rest of the fellowship? If somebody calls, because in my mind, and I'm going to my Saturday morning cartoons, I've got these superhero fellowships with a secret society, and somebody from the back cave calls and says, you know.
Right. Well, I think some of that is growing up when I grew up, where the dad was the breadwinner and the person that everything moved around in a lot of households, that he was the center. But I also think, like, in talking with Bart, who also is, her dad is a little bit older than my dad, but we were there, your experience very different. If he was associate, but he didn't treat you all like that. My dad was like, he was gone a lot, and it was like, you know, this person is going to live with us, or this person, like we are going to give a ride to this person. I mean, it was just like all the time. It's still today. If I went home, they'd be like, oh, there's 3 other people joining us for dinner. Like, it's not like I can say, don't do that. It's just part of the way that they live.
Well, that's the ministers have that problem in general.
Yeah.
And so when you blur the line between, it's supposed to be God, family, then church, but when your church is God, that your thing, those people get it flipped often. And so people who are serving God as their job often get it flipped, and so many ministers of all denominations, not just the fellowship, everybody struggles with
That was
that.
very true for people years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you make this break. You're different. You're not who your parents raised you to be. What is it? Are you still communicating with your family?
Yeah.
I mean, how do they feel? Do they think
I'm not sharing this with you. Well, one of the difficulties about that, I would like to be able to share it with them, is that there is a real tenderness and sensitivity to criticism. So the flip side of being is just like this bold, I'm going to talk to people about Jesus, and like fearlessness. The other side of it is like a real sensitivity to, especially from my generation to my parents. They just don't handle it well. My dad is more, because he always thinks he's right. So whatever I say, it's going to bounce off him, because he's like, well, I know I'm right. So you can just say whatever you want, you know. But my mom, like, she's a very, very tender person. So that's another piece of this. And I don't think that I don't know if that has anything to do with the fellowship or family. That's just my family and the way they work. It's a barrier when somebody's like that because you really can't be that close with them. Like I would like to be, but my efforts to be on that level have not been positive.
Your brothers too? I mean, they're your generation.
You mean like, are they sharing with them?
How do they feel?
Oh, they believe, very similar to my parents.
Because it's
Very similar. Yeah,
It's good.
yeah. And my older brother is like, he's very assertive with my parents. He actually, they lived together, and he was fine with that. Like, he would just tell them, he's like, you and my younger brother's Paul, you and Paul, you just tell him no, just tell him what to do, just tell him, because that's what he would do. And I was like, who are you even talking about? Are you talking about our parents? How do you do that, you know? But his firstborn, he has a different personality, so.
He's a boy.
Yeah, I'm the only girl, so that I'm in the middle, I don't know. It's just, it's navigating the peacemaking and all that, so. Hi, Angela.
I'm curious, when your family went to Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
and it was just your family unit,
right?
did you look forward to that, or had living in the community become more normative? So did you look forward to going back into that larger community?
So this is a really interesting question, because that was happening when I was an adolescent, and and it was like, okay, we're going to Pennsylvania, and I'm like, but I have a party to go to Saturday. And it's like, what do you mean we have to go up there again? So I was pushing against that, and I was also pushing against having to go to church every Sunday. I was like, what? Like starting in about 7th grade, especially to about 9th grade, I was like, I don't want to go. But it was like, you have to go or you get punished, even at that age. So it was very rigid. It was very rigid. There was and often Sunday was our day of rest. Like we couldn't play with that. We couldn't make any plans. We went to church and we went. I think I just wanted to be on my own, like a lot of teenagers. Like I didn't really want to be home. I didn't want to be with my family. I was really sick and tired of a lot of people all the time. But when I look back on it, I don't remember that as much as I remember fondly the people that I lived with. So it's funny how memory works, because I can remember some of those weekends and just thinking, I've had enough of this place, and I've had enough, you know, but I couldn't say that. Part of the reason I couldn't say that to my family was, but you can't say that because we're doing God's work. You know, like you're anti-Christian if you're against this, because that's what we're doing. You need to talk to God about your bad attitude, you know? And so there's a lot of restrictions. Anyway, I think we're at 7:50. And I knew that we were just going to go for an hour, but if anybody has any other questions, I can answer them.